Welcome back to the channel, Warhammer Man Studios. I'm Warhammer Man, and today we're going to be taking a look at Warcry Monsters. This video is sponsored by CMO Games. More on that later. So we're going to do the full breakdown on monsters in this video and the rules, and then we're going to take a look at one specific monster only available to the Chaos Warbands, and that is the best monster currently in the meta, the Chimera. But before we take a look specifically at the Chimera, I want to go through all of the monster rules and make sure we have a good understanding of them. Then we're going to look at how we can best use those rules to our advantage. Alright, so here we have monsters. This is all the basic rules for monsters, kind of compiled here in this one little slide. Monsters are gargantuan creatures that rampage across the battlefield. You can include one fighter with the monster ruin mark in your warband as a monster if their faction ruin mark belongs to the same Grand Alliance as your warband's faction ruin mark. So in this case, Chaos. So there are 4 Grand Alliances in Warcry. You have Order, Chaos, Death, and Destruction. So you have to share the ruin mark with your warband and also the monster. Now, some monsters are specific, other ones just have a different name but can be taken in different alliances as well. So monsters have special rules that apply to them in battle. Alright, so here we see the damage table. Monster profiles often have characteristics marked with a star and a corresponding damage table. The value of these characteristics is based on the number of wounds currently allocated to that monster as shown on its damage table. So this is a very common rule or system that's used in many games. You might refer to it as like degrading, but essentially what it is the more damage you take, the less effective you become at either fighting or moving, etc. Then we have battle groups. If your warband includes a monster, when dividing fighters into battle groups, the monster is placed in one of the battle groups by itself, and the remaining fighters in the warband are spread amongst the other 2 battle groups as evenly as possible. So this is very important. If you take a monster, it's going to be alone in a battle group, and then everybody else just gets divided between the 2 remaining battle groups as evenly as possible. So that's actually in many ways an advantage. Then we have deployment. Because of their great size, when monsters are set up during deployment, they only need to be placed within 3 inch of the deployment point instead of wholly within 3. So normally when you have your deployment card, you have to place all the fighters from that group inside of that 3 inch deployment area. In this case, the monster just has to have a bit of its base touching the deployment area. So they also have very large bases in this game, so that gives you a huge advantage to essentially get in position. Activating monsters. A monster is activated 3 times in a battle round instead of only once. However, each time it is activated, it can make only 1 action instead of 2. Each time a monster is activated, it can use 1 ability before or after its action. So that's a very important rule right there. If a monster makes a wait action, its activation immediately ends. This monster cannot use a wait action to begin waiting. In addition, monsters cannot make reactions. So the wait and the reaction thing is not what we're going to focus on here. What we're going to focus on is how the monsters actually activate and how we can use that to our advantage. So normally a fighter would activate and then get 2 options. It could move, it could fight, it could fall back, any combination of those things. With a monster, when it activates, it gets the choice to do 1 single action. And then after that, the activation ends. But each time it activates, which will be 3 total times per turn, you can use one of the abilities. So instead of activating like a normal fighter and getting 2 opportunities to use a action, the monster is going to have 3 opportunities to use an action, but they have to alternate with the opposing player in between those 3. But each time you activate one of those 3, you're allowed to use an ability. So in a single turn, a monster can make 3 different actions and then also use 3 different abilities, which is very important. So we have move actions with monsters next. A monster can climb and jump like any other fighter. However, if at the end of its move activation, its base is not wholly on a platform or the battlefield floor, it falls. When a monster falls, any part of the monster's base can be placed on the point picked by your opponent instead of just the center. So that's very important. You don't want to stop up on top of there because that gives your opponent the ability to essentially, you force fall off there and then they can place you however they want and put you at a disadvantaged position. So if you cannot have your base completely on top of terrain pieces, you're going to automatically fall at the end of your turn, regardless of if you have fly or anything like that. So typically you're not going to want to stop your activation or end your activation on top of a piece of terrain unless you're up there doing something very important like fighting or something like that. So monsters and abilities. If any monsters are in play, all fighters except the monsters themselves and fighters with the beast ruin mark can use a monster hunting abilities shown opposite. So we're going to take a look at those monster hunting abilities. It's very important to remember that beasts cannot use those, and obviously other monsters cannot use those. But regular fighters and allies can definitely use them, and they should. Monsters themselves each have their own ability table and cannot use the universal abilities. In addition, monsters can use the monster ability table shown opposite. So just like the monster hunter abilities are in play, monsters also have universal abilities as well as their own specific abilities. So now that we have a good idea as to how monsters operate, we're going to take a look at the Chimera. This is exclusive to Chaos. It's very good, it's very expensive, but right now it is the best monster in the game. A particularly gross and deadly example of Chaos mutation is the Chimera, a three-headed amalgamation of bestial body parts known for its unrelenting aggression. So Chimera is 390 points, so if you're playing like match play 1000 points, this thing is almost 40% of your warband. So it has range 2 on its attacks, it has 6 total attacks, it hits at strength 6, and then it has essentially the damage table like we referred to earlier. So if we look down here at the actual damage table, it says damage points allocated. So we're going to take however many points it has taken in this battle so far, and then once it falls down to a certain bracket, it then uses those stats instead. So at the beginning of the game, obviously it has 45 hit points, hasn't been damaged. It's going to move 12, and then when it hits, it's going to do 5 damage on a regular hit and 10 on a crit. And then if it takes more than 10 damage, so between 11 and 20, it'll go down to 10 move, and then 4, 8 damage. 21 to 30 is 8, 3, 6 damage. 31 to 40, 6, 2, 4. And then 41 to 44, obviously hanging on by a thread, it would be move 4 and damage 1, 2. So it is important to, when fighting against monsters, try to consistently put damage onto them, because bracketing them is a big deal. It substantially decreases their ability to navigate the battlefield, especially something like a Chimera with wings, and then also the ability of it to actually dish out damage. And because they become weaker and weaker, the first bit of damage you do to them is the most important, because it starts bringing down their overall effectiveness. So if you're playing with the Chimera, you should be thinking the same thing. I want to keep my maximum move as long as possible at 12. Defense is only 4. So while monsters are strong and they can do a lot of damage, they're also not that difficult to hurt. And then with 45 hit points, that's obviously really good, but it's not uncommon for a very strong fighter or ally, even a monster themselves, to do 25 plus damage in a single round. So you could easily get bracketed down to very, very minimal effectiveness if you're poorly positioned. So with the Chimera, that shouldn't be an issue, because you have that move 12, because you can fly. Now the important thing though is you're going to activate fly your 12 and then land, and then your opponent's going to get an opportunity to activate after that. So if you fly and then land in combat with someone, that other person is going to get to activate 2 times and potentially use an ability against you before you actually get a chance to strike. So that is very, very important for what we're going to start discussing shortly. So for the Chimera, their abilities are okay. The truth is they have the double tail whip. Pick a visible enemy fighter within 3 of this fighter and roll a dice. On a roll of 4 plus, allocate 3 damage points to that fighter. So the max damage you can do to someone is 3 damage with this, and there's only a 50% chance. So you're going to spend a double to do an average of 1.5 points of damage. So that's obviously not good at all. Next we have the triple Leonin Roar. Until the end of the battle round, subtract 1 from the attack's characteristics to a minimum of 1 of attack actions made by enemy fighters while they are within 6 of this fighter. So because the Chimera has a really big base, within 6 of this fighter actually can be effective, especially if you're holding down like a key point in the board where a bunch of guys are at. But the triple is kind of expensive for this ability. While it is a good ability, you're basically going to be giving up a lot of other really strong triples. So this is good if you have a bunch of guys that are around you that have 2 attacks and you can decrease their effectiveness by 50%. But if they have 3 or 4 attacks, or you're only hitting 1 or 2 guys, there's probably a better way you can spend your triple. And then finally the quad. Obviously this is the most highly sought combination of dice in the game. So you want to be able to do something absolutely phenomenal with this. And the Chimera has a pretty awesome quad. The Draconic Head's Fiery Breath. Allocate a number of damage points equal to the value of this ability to all visible enemy fighters within 4 inches of this fighter. So that's very important, because the value of the ability really matters on this, because that's what we're going to use to see how much damage we do. So if you have a quad 1, this is probably not worth it. Even if you're hitting multiple guys, you're still not doing very much damage. Now if you have a quad 5 or a quad 6, and you can hit 2 or 3 guys or finish off a key fighter, this is definitely a great ability to have. And again, with the base being so big, it's not crazy to think that you could be hitting, essentially like a 9-inch or 10-inch template on the tabletop where you're hitting 3, 4, or more fighters, potentially for 5 or 6 points each. And unlike the double tail whip that we have to do 3 damage 50% of the time, this just does whatever the ability score damage is automatically. So very, very good quad in certain scenarios. All right, so the Chimera is very good. Its abilities are very good, but the truth is the stat block is what this is all about. The ability to fly is huge because it allows you to get around terrain, but there are some other important things as well. So we're going to go over to the generic abilities now. And now a quick message from this week's sponsor. This video is sponsored by CMOgames.com, where you can get 15% off most Games Workshop pre-orders, and they go live right at midnight Saturday mornings. CMOgames.com offers free shipping on orders over $25 in the US 48, and most orders ship within 24 hours. CMOgames.com has been selling Games Workshop products online for more than 20 years, and customer service is their top priority. CMOgames.com carries the full line of Games Workshop products, including 40K, Age of Sigmar, Kill Team, Warcry, paints, hobbies, and tools. Visit CMOgames.com using the affiliate link in the description below so they know you heard about CMOgames.com from Warhammer Man Studios. Now, back to the video. So these are the monster abilities that everyone has access to. So the double is a monster's reach until the end of this monster's activation. Do not count the vertical distance when measuring the range for attack actions by this monster. So if somebody's up on like a second or third floor, especially if you don't have the ability to fly, you can spend a double and then you can just attack them without accounting for that vertical distance. Definitely is situational. Next we have the triple, and this is probably the best overall of any ability. So the drag and maul. Pick a visible enemy fighter within 6 inches of this monster. Remove that fighter from the battlefield and set them up within 1 inch of this monster. Then roll a number of dice equal to the value of this ability. For each 4+, allocate 3 damage points to that fighter. So this is huge. You're going to want to be doing this any opportunity you get with your monster, but there's specific opportunities where this works amazing. So there's some important parts about drag and maul. First, pick a visible enemy fighter within 6. So the ability score doesn't matter here. You're just going to get a 6-inch reach on this on a triple, which is awesome because you could have triple 1s and this ability is still great. So remove that fighter from the battlefield and set them up within 1 inch of this monster. So it doesn't sound like this is an amazing ability, but imagine if you are 6 inches away from a fighter, you can pull them towards you and then immediately attack them because you only get the 1 activation, but you can use an ability. Or if you're chasing down a fighter and you don't quite get to him, maybe you fly 10 or 12 inches and land in front of them, you can reach an extra 6 off to that and then pull them into combat with you. So they have to either try to fight you now or they have to spend a move to get away from you. But the real reason this is awesome is because one of the biggest weaknesses that monsters or really anyone has in the game is being netted. If you get netted, essentially people can do it from 3 inches away, sometimes more. And once you get netted, you're not allowed to move or fall back. Which means if you don't have a reach weapon and there's nobody you can hit, there's basically nothing you can do. So if somebody nets your monster, you're at a huge disadvantage because now you just lost your 3 activations if you haven't gone yet, and you're just frozen in place if you can't reach someone. So with this ability, you can basically grab someone from 6 inches away, pull them into reach, and then still be able to kill stuff. Now, obviously, you roll a number of dice equal to the value of this ability. So if you have a 6 or a 5 or a 4, you're going to do a decent amount of damage as well. If you roll a 6, for each 4 up, allocate 3 damage to them, you're going to average roll 3 4-ups, which means you're going to do 9 damage on top of the ability to relocate stuff. And there's lots of other cool scenarios where moving someone around off an objective or away from a certain area, out of reach of one of your fighters, monster battles between each other. There's a lot of really cool stuff that can happen here. But that triple Dragon Maul is pretty much the best thing that you can have in the game. And then finally we have Quad Demolishing Rampage. Pick a terrain feature within 1 inch of this monster. In order of your choice, place each objective, treasure token, and fighter that is on that terrain feature and on any other terrain features that is on that terrain feature on the battlefield floor in a location of your choice as close as possible horizontally to the current location. So basically, pick a terrain feature, take everything off that terrain feature, and put it on the battlefield floor. Then, in order of your choice, each fighter placed on the battlefield floor in this manner suffers impact damage. Then, remove the terrain feature. So you basically completely remove a terrain feature from the battlefield, which is cool, especially if somebody's hiding up on a terrain feature and you don't have wings or something like that. But again, this is not your ideal situation for a quad, and it's really not that great. So as good as the monsters are, as good as the monster abilities are, we've talked about all the positives. Let's talk about the negatives. So when you take a monster, your opponent unlocks the ability to do monster hunting against you. So here we have the monster hunting abilities anyone can do against the monster. And keep in mind with the monsters, they're going to move and then that's it. That's their whole activation. So if a monster flies, say our Chimera, 12 inches and gets into combat with somebody, now that fighter gets a whole opportunity to activate before you actually get to try to kill them. So you fly there at land and then they get first shot at you. So with the double binding ropes, this is really good. Pick an enemy monster within 1 inch of this fighter and roll a number of dice equal to the value of this ability. So it shouldn't be hard for you to have a double 6 or double 5. For each 4+, subtract 1 from the move characteristic of that monster to a minimum of 3 until the end of the battle. So this is a permanent effect against them. Once you hit them with that binding rope, let's say you hit them with a 6, 50% of those 6 dice you roll are going to be 4-ups. So you're going to subtract 3 from the monster's movement permanently in the battle. So our Chimera started at 12 and now it's down to 9. And then if it degrades, it's going to lose its normal 2 as well. So then it's down to 7. And then, you know, who knows? This happens to it again. You can really, really hurt monsters by doing this to them. But the problem is, if you do the binding ropes, you're going to be sitting there and you're basically bait after that. So next we have triple, go for the eyes. If the next attack action made by this fighter, this activation that targets an enemy monster scores any critical hits. Subtract 1 from the attack's characteristic to a minimum of 1 of attack actions made by that monster until the end of the battle. So all this is saying basically, you're going to proc this for a triple, go for the eyes. And then you're going to activate, attack this monster, and if you score any critical hits at all, whether you score 1 or 3, if you score any at all, you're going to subtract 1 from that monster's attacks till the end of the battle. So this is very, very strong. A lot of monsters, unfortunately, have 6 or 5 attacks. So you're decreasing their effectiveness for sure by doing this. But also, it might not be enough to really swing the battle on them until you start degrading them. But again, the first damage you start doing to them and chipping away at them, if you start taking away movement with binding ropes for the rest of the battle and gouging out eyes and whatnot, you can really start to hurt these monsters and really decrease their effectiveness quickly. So quad, taunt next. Pick a visible enemy monster within 6 inches of this fighter and roll a number of dice equal to the value of this ability. If a 4+ is rolled on any of the dice, then until the end of the battle round or until this fighter is taken down, attack actions made by that monster must target this fighter. So you have to get within 6 inches of the monster and then you can taunt them with this quad. And assuming you have, say, a quad 4, you're going to roll 4 dice and chances are you're going to get 2 4-ups. But all you need is 1. So even if you have a quad 2, there's still probability in your favor that you'll get this off. But essentially all you're doing is trying to protect another fighter from getting killed. Maybe they have some treasure. Maybe they're on an objective or there's something important you want to do with them next. So you're basically sacrificing this other fighter most of the time. In my opinion, not a great way to spend a quad. The double and triple are awesome though, and you're going to want to use these against your opponent's monsters. So there we have it. We took a quick look at the Chimera and then also all of the monster rules that go along with them. You could apply all of the other monster rules to different monsters. Obviously, some of them fly, others do not. Some of them have really strong abilities of their own. But the truth is, you're almost always going to want to use Dragon Maul. And then also, if you're fighting against monsters, you're almost always going to use Binding Ropes and go for the eyes. So that's our wrap up for the Warcry Monster Breakdown, taking a look specifically at the Chaos Chimera. We'll do a follow-up video and we're going to basically put that Chimera into some other warbands and take a look at some pluses and minuses and how we can best suit that for competitive play. Special thanks to CMO Games for sponsoring today's video. I am Warhammer Man. This is Warhammer Man Studios with our Warcry Monster Breakdown, and I'm out of here.